Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Parenting Hour. You're tuned into Unity FM 93.5 here in Birmingham and 1.5 down south. That all the other stations take this channel from. Alhamdulillah, we're here with you again this evening in lockdown, our first session in lockdown. Alhamdulillah, we're alive, we're well, we're healthy here. I'm alive, I'm well, I'm healthy, alhamdulillah, thank God. My name is Kathleen and I'm with you for the next hour presenting Parenting Hour. We are going to have a very important conversation this evening with somebody that I'm sure you've come across before in your working and networking, mashallah. The Muslim Women Helpline and Fareza Valid is very well known in her field, mashallah, and they do a lot of very useful work there. And this evening we want to focus and bring you some information around what it may feel like being locked down and in your homes, and situations that can occur and do occur in some homes, and how we can deal with that, and how we can, and where can we go for support if we need that extra help. So assalamu alaikum, welcome to you this evening.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be on Unity FM, and I'm looking forward to our conversation that we're going to be having today.
Wonderful. I am too, actually. So it's a real learning opportunity for me as well. Okay. Indeed. And I suppose our listeners, most of them will have come across your name and come across the Muslim Women Help Network, the Muslim Women Network previously. But in case they haven't, maybe we should start at the start. And if you can introduce yourself and introduce what do you do?
Okay, so I'm the Executive Director of the Muslim Women's Network UK. We are a women's rights organization fighting for the rights of women and girls across the country. And we have a national helpline which is culturally and faith sensitive. It's called the Muslim Women's Network Helpline, and we are now in our 6th year. And alhamdulillah, in our first year, we helped just over 350 people. And last year, it was over 1,200 individuals. The range of issues that we deal with is from anything from domestic abuse, which we'll be talking about today, to forced marriage, to mental health issues, isolation, and those are really sensitive topics that we work on. And ultimately, what we're providing is information, advice, and support for those in need and those in crisis.
Wow, that's a lot of work you're doing. And you're based in Birmingham, but I presume you're national, that you get calls and people contacting you from all over the UK.
Yes, we are based in Birmingham, but we are national, and we do get calls from across the country. Birmingham and London are our top 2 cities, but we get calls from pretty much every other city also. Sadly, these problems exist in all our communities and in society generally. So it's really important for people to have a safe space to really share what they're experiencing and get the help that they need.
That is so true. And especially when we're all now at the moment in lockdown in our homes, we rely on internet and phone calls and having contact over the phone with people. But mashallah, you've been up and running for 6 years, so you're very used to this. You didn't have to change a lot, I assume, when we went into lockdown, did you?
No. So our helpline usually operates from a central location in Birmingham. So we have an office and the helpline operates, but we are now operating remotely. And alhamdulillah, we managed to do that a week before the lockdown, and our staff are now adjusted to this new way of working. It does take some adjustment, I have to say. But we're set up, we're making sure that the lines are still confidential, that people have privacy in their homes. All our staff have set ground rules with their families, so when they're working, they're not being interrupted. We're making sure that, all the safety elements, the GDPR elements, no one likes to hear about GDPR, but it's important, particularly on a helpline setting. So we've got all of that covered now, and alhamdulillah, we're still able to offer the helpline service Monday to Friday, 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. And And what we're finding is that sometimes it may not be as easy to pick up the phone to make a call. So we have had an increase in the number of emails we're receiving, web chats. So you can go onto the MWN helpline website and you can have a web chat with us. It's still the same people responding to the calls who have all been trained. You know, I have to say the Muslim Women's Network does train its staff very hard, and we have a really good understanding of the breadth of issues that Muslim women may be facing in their lives.
MashaAllah, MashaAllah. That's really good that you've had those high standards, MashaAllah, and really reassures people that you're with the confidentiality. I suppose it's when you're at home that they don't know who's listening to you, etc. So to have that in place, that's really good, and to maintain that. How do you manage, which I presume with all your workers, you have a lot of people on the phones and transferring those calls just from a logistic purpose? How do you manage?
Okay, so our calls are VoIP calls, which are internet phone line, and so our calls have been diverted, but they've been diverted securely. We use a company, an IT company, to do that. So the calls are not being handled by people on their personal mobiles. It actually goes through kind of still a work system. So I think this is all really important because we take the security and the safety of our callers, super seriously, because people call us with really complex situations, and we want to make sure that what we do in supporting them does not jeopardize them in any way. And calls, like I said, range, and particularly in the last few weeks, what we're finding is that mental health is being affected. I think we'll all agree that we've all had some difficulty in the past few weeks, just readjusting to this new normal, and that's not easy for everyone. So just, for somebody who's maybe now having to work from home, now has the kids at home, it has been, adjustment that has needed to happen. But now think about the person who may have been in a domestic abuse situation where, I think we're all familiar with domestic abuse as a term. And many of us know that it's not just physical abuse, but it can also be emotional abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse, financial abuse, economic abuse, even harassment, stalking, online and digital abuse. All of this comes within this broader definition. And recently, an inclusion in the domestic abuse definition was something which is called coercive control. Now, coercive control is really about, it's like a pattern of behavior where a person can be threatened with assault, humiliation, intimidation. The victim may be punished, or ways to frighten the victim are used. And what makes the situation of control possible is isolation. So isolating the individual, the victim, from support, exploiting them, depriving them of their independence, regulating their everyday behavior is usually the kinds of things that happen when someone is being coercively controlled. Now let's think about the current situation in the lockdown, where we're all at home, where we're already physically isolated from our friends, from our family, from our workplace in many instances. And those can be kind of the safety net that the victim of abuse may get through their day with, but those things aren't there. So I think it's really important for us to talk about coercive control right now and what that means to individuals who are experiencing it, and how hard that must be when you're already isolated and then to have this additional control happening to you.
Yes, well, quite agree with you. Indeed, we have had a lot of parents coming looking for support and help with their own children, to deal with their own children. And then on top of that, if we have a situation like this where there's something going on, there's something not right in the family, and it could be either way. We tend to think of abuse usually of men on women, but it can be the other way around, women on men as well. So we need to be aware of that. Yeah. It's really heartbreaking, actually, to think of this, because a lot of people, when they look at abuse, they think physical abuse, and that's what first comes to their mind. So they
Exactly.
don't know about coercive control and what does that mean. So maybe actually, if you don't mind unpicking that a little bit more about what would that look like? What would that be in a situation for people? How would they recognize this?
Well, coercive behavior, like I mentioned, often starts with isolating you from your family and friends. So in
Mm-hmm.
the current situation, it may be that the isolation happens where the controller, and you're right, it's not always, you know, um, females who are the victims. Men can be the victims of abuse also, but the majority, I have to say, especially with the calls we receive on the helpline, are women are the victims of abuse. So the isolation right now could happen where the perpetrator doesn't allow the victim to make calls to their friends and their family. Right now, we're all connecting with Skype chats, FaceTime, WhatsApp calls, and that's how we're getting through our day. We're calling our friends and our family. But that further isolation may be where you're not allowed to make those calls. Your phone is taken away from you. It could also be things like depriving you of basic needs like food. Now, right now, we know that there was a lot of panic buying going on. I'm hoping people have now calmed down a little, but there is still kind of, food that needs to be considered and availability of food. So it could be that rather than money being spent on necessities for the family, actually that money is being used on other things, which aren't necessary. And actually what happens is that essentials are deprived from the victim. Things like monitoring your time, like how much time are you spending in the kitchen when you should be in the lounge with me, talking to me, spending time with me. It could be, that the abuse, emotional abuse gets more. So calling you names, putting you down, humiliating you, degrading you happens more regularly. There's also an element of controlling of finances, which I think I've alluded to with the shopping and the purchasing of food, but it could be now you don't have access to your bank account. Your cards have been taken away. You're not able to make purchases yourself. So these are things that could be happening right now. And like I said, we as a community need to really have a zero tolerance on all forms of abuse, not just physical abuse. So that we need to be looking out for the people we know may be at risk, our friends, our family, checking in on them regularly. And maybe we can talk about some of the warning signs that we can look out for also.
That would be very, very good indeed, because I was just going to ask you, how could we recognize this? Which leads us into the warning signs, I suppose, because maybe some people are in relationships that are, the normal relationship is similar maybe to what you're talking about. The wife there mightn't have her own money coming in. She may rely on her husband buying the shopping and doing things, and now that he's maybe out of work or whatever, things are tough anyway, and it seems very close to what you're saying, but it may not be coercive control there. It may be that things are just tough. So it's hard to unpick some of the things. So maybe we could explore that a little bit more about this and how we get
I guess you're right though, that it's not always clear cut, and sometimes it's hard. We often get women call the helpline and they don't realize that they are in an abusive situation, because often control and power and intimidation happens subtly. It happens bit by bit, not in one go, and that's why sometimes the physical abuse is easier to recognize as abuse, but the other forms of emotional abuse, economic abuse, is not as easy. And it happens little by little, and the person over time realizes that actually they are in an abusive situation. So as friends and family, you're right, there's definitely going to be added strain right now, but there are things that we can do to really look out for one another. But also, if in doubt, speak to someone, I would say. There are lots of organizations, the Muslim Women's Network Helpline is one of them, but there are lots of organizations out there who are able to offer support. We're still open, we're still working, and we're able to provide information, advice, support, and just be that sounding board. If something doesn't feel right to you, ask someone about it, would always be my advice when it comes to these sensitive issues.
So if there was somebody listening in and knew of somebody that, from what you're saying now, that sounds like my friend, that sounds like what she's been going through, she's never mentioned anything to me, but what you're talking about this evening really sounds very familiar to me. What could she do? What could she do about her friend? How could she help her friend?
I would definitely say seek support. Keep a log of kind of instances, or write it down, kind of the things that you don't think are quite right. I think it's important for us to kind of be able to look at these things objectively also. There's certain things that other organizations are recommending. So right now, lots of people are worried about finances. It's a very real situation. However, the person may be worrying more than you would expect from them. So they express high levels of concern, higher than actually the norm right now. And that's the reason I say that, is because someone experiencing economic abuse might express like concern or distress about the change in income. And they might tell you that they're struggling to manage on a reduced income, or say that their budget or allowance from their partner has been reduced. But like you're saying, it's a fine line. With questions, you can kind of discover more. Is that just normal because, you know, less is happening right now? But we also know that the government is putting in support for individuals who, you know, like furloughing is something that some companies are doing. Also, universal credit is being made more available more quickly. So there are other things which are happening. So if it's not abuse, if nothing else, what you'll do by seeking support for that individual is get them information and advice which may be useful for them. And that's worth it, you know? It could be that the person says to you that actually, I can't access my money, which seems quite strange. A lot of us do have, you know, banking on our phones, banking online. Why does the person not have access to their money? It could be that actually work was something that the abuser used. You know, so work is something which is interesting. Sorry, what I'm trying to describe is that it may be that an abuser pressurizes someone to leave their job in order to further isolate them. So what we found with women who have children, they can, and this is a worry right now, they can often be pressurized to leave their jobs because they are seen as the homemaker. So the kids are at home right now, and so the woman needs to leave her job. But actually, it's not just to look after the kids, it's because the abuser wants to control that woman's behavior and have her at home, where he then has, you know, her at his beck and call, and is able to further isolate the individual. So it may not be as simple. We're all making these decisions about our lives right now, to work, not to work, how to manage the kids. And like I said, it's not straightforward, but I think the further isolation of individuals should be questioned. We should be asking our friends, you know, haven't spoken to you for 2 weeks, you know, why not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is so important actually, because now in this isolation period, as you mentioned when we first started, we're all feeling the stress of this, you know, because we're all worried about what's happening out there. We're all worried about this disease, who could catch it, what relatives could. So that underlying stress is affecting us all, even as professionals, and we're all trying to adapt to that into our daily routines and get on with our work. But if you have further people on top of you and saying, no, you must leave your job, and your job is to educate the kids, and your job is to cook their meals, and your job is to be here for them, that is very difficult. That is very different. And yeah, we need to pick up on that.
So we've spoken about economic abuse and emotional abuse and coercive control. We also do need to speak about physical abuse. Physical abuse is a big part of abuse and does happen and is happening regularly to women across the country. There's been an increase in the number of calls to national helplines on this issue, just even over the weekend. Okay, so we know that home is not always a safe place for everyone to be, and spending more time with an abuser may increase your risk of being harmed, and actually keeping safe, is really difficult. And so normally going to work or going to stay at a friend's house or a family member's house may be something that people do to get away from the abuser, and that's not a possibility right now. And so we are worried about these women and men who are in these abusive situations. But what we need to say is that help is available. So while we strongly urge everyone to follow the government guidelines in terms of COVID-19, stay at home, if you are at risk of, and if your safety is at risk, then you need to call 999, seek help, and help is available.
That's such an important message to get across, and the help is still there. Everything, the systems are still working in place.
Yeah.
Organizations like yourself are still working, all doing everything in a different way, but still doing everything. So the help is there. And whereas before a woman might have managed to get through it and said, okay, he goes to work at 8 o'clock in the morning, he's not home until 7 o'clock in the evening time. I've only got a couple of hours to kind of keep out of the way and keep out of his way while before, but now he's at home all day. That's very different, and you need to be able to understand your body, what your body is telling you when you're not feeling safe, and respond to that and pick up that phone and make those calls. Is there something, and I don't know if we get a chance to do this actually before the commercial break, but we will continue it if not afterwards. Is there a way that women could, if they didn't want to leave now, what should they do? That's what I'm trying to say. What should they do? How should they prepare themselves to be ready if to make that call? So maybe they're in the situation, but they are not quite there, or they're not confident enough to do this, but what should they be doing in the meantime?
So that's something we call safety planning. And I think, making the decision to leave a situation is difficult. Firstly, I think definitely ask for help. So contact an organization like the MWN helpline or other organizations and speak to someone to help you think through your safety plan. But I would say also keep in touch. Find ways to keep in contact with your family, who you trust, friends, neighbors, and colleagues that you can turn to for support if you need it. And I think after we come back from the break, we can definitely talk about other support which is available in terms of safety planning. Also, if your mobile phone is being monitored more than usual while you're at home, there are ways that you can kind of ensure your safety with organizations. Like I said, emails, web chats, contacting organizations using those modes is possible and can be done. So safety planning is definitely something that victims of abuse should consider.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think it's really important for us to talk about this after the break, because I'm going to in a bit more detail, because at the moment, with everybody being at home as well, the internet is really stretched. I know in our house, everybody wants a piece of it and everybody's working from home. So, and all the neighbors have children doing homework and trying to do things. So internet is really at a stretch. So we need to look at what could we do if the people were in these situations, how they could react quickly with internet not being there, maybe able to support them, or what should they have in place for this. So I think we still have a lot to talk about. Can you just give out the details again of the helpline just before we go into the commercial break, and then we can remind people again to grab a piece of pen and paper if they didn't get it after the break.
Yeah, sure. So the Muslim Women's Network Helpline website is www.mwn.org. mwnhelpline.co.uk. The phone number is 0800 999 5786, and the email address is info@mwnhelpline.co.uk.
Wonderful. And as you said, you're open Monday to Friday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m.
Yeah.
There's somebody there. The phones are ringing.
Yeah, and if you email us or contact us and leave us a voice message, we'll pick it up, as soon as we open. So even if you contact us outside of those times, as soon as we're back in the office or working from home at our desk, then we're gonna pick up your message and we will contact you back.
Wonderful, great. We're just coming into a commercial break, listeners. Please do tune into us after this commercial break, and we'll be back to talk to you more about how to plan and what advice you can give. Maybe it's not for yourself, but maybe it is for your neighbor, for your sister, people that around you that trust you. And we all need to have this information. So please do tune into us again after this commercial break, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum, listeners. Welcome back to Unity FM 93.5. This is Kathleen with you on Parenting Hour. We're here with Faiza talking about domestic abuse that happens and isolation within this time at the moment that we're all in lockdown. We're calling it lockdown here. In Ireland, they're calling it cocooning. So it's a different terminology. And I kind of like the cocooning terminology, actually, because it sounds like that when we come out of this, we're all going to be transformed and flying away into beautiful butterflies and different people. And inshallah, we will all be better when we come out of this. And we won't have any negative effects, inshallah, from this lockdown period. This evening, though, we're talking about a very serious topic. And we're talking about the help that's out there for anybody that is suffering from domestic abuse. And we've broke that down actually into the different sections. Maybe we weren't while we're just, before we talk about different safety planning, if we can just revise or review what we spoke about in the first part again about the breakdown of domestic abuse, because it's not just the violence which we're going to continue talking about, but it is other things.
Yeah, so, I was talking about domestic abuse, and the definition of domestic abuse is not just physical abuse. So it includes emotional abuse, psychological abuse, financial or economic abuse, harassment and stalking, online and digital abuse. And we haven't spoken about that yet in terms of online or digital abuse. And I think right now, with everyone at home online, that may be something also which we may see more calls on the Muslim Women's Network helpline. And we also spoke about coercive control. Now, coercive control is domestic abuse. It's where an act or a pattern of acts is used to assault, threat, humiliate, or intimidate. It could be used to punish or frighten a victim of domestic abuse. And essentially, it's all about controlling behavior. We know that abuse is about an abuse of power and control. But with coercive control, it's designed to make a person dependent on the perpetrator by isolating them from support, exploiting them, depriving them of their independence, and regulating their everyday behavior. So if you think about the situation we're in right now with lockdown, actually that's easier for a perpetrator to do to an individual, to a victim of abuse. So really we're saying right now that as friends and family, we need to look out for one another. And yes, we can't see each other physically, in close proximity, but we can check in with those around us who may be in need. And I think the message that I really want to get out is organizations like the Muslim Women's Network and the service we run is open. The MWN helpline is open, Women's Aid is open, Refuge is open, and we're here to support those who are in abusive situations. We recognize that being at home right now with an abuser may not be a nice place to be right now. Being in this lockdown situation is going to exacerbate people's experiences of abuse. So I guess the message, Kathleen, today is seek support, seek help, because help is available. And if you are in immediate danger, contact the police, and if you know anyone who's in immediate danger and is experiencing abuse, contact the police.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for reviewing that. You mentioned online there as something maybe on the increase. How would that look like online? What would that feel like or look like to people?
So online abuse is, there are many forms of online abuse, and often, harassment can happen. So some of us are on social media more than others. So it could be constant messaging. It could be also controlling what you do online. It could be, it could be sending images which only you and that person may have access to. On the MWN helpline, we've even had, individuals who, we had a young girl who was at college, and the person threatening her was threatening to show her family photos of her standing next to a guy at college. Nothing had happened between them. She was just literally standing next to him in a photo. But he knew that her family would not have been happy with that. But then we talk about other forms of abuse where sexual images are taken. Women, if the woman is uncovered, she doesn't have a headscarf on, she may not be fully clothed. We've heard all of these stories, and those things happen and are used as a form of abuse. And within our communities where honor and, shame and honor is used, it's an additional form of control and harassment which happens.
Because people don't always understand those abuses, and I'm glad you've mentioned them. I've come across some people saying that, oh, my partner doesn't like me wearing things, or when I come down, he says, no, go change into this dress, or here, go put makeup on for me. It's and wear this and wear that. So it's a bit more than just that normal loving kind of relationship where you're kind of putting on makeup and having that nice talking together. It is, no, you need to do this, I don't like you in this, and when they do this, no, I don't want this either, and they go keep after them to change what they're wearing, or even their looks. They don't even like the way they're looking.
Yeah, I think control and abuse, you should always ask yourself the question, what would happen if I said no? If you said no and there were no consequences, well, that's okay. But if you said no and that had consequences, whether it's an argument, whether it's physical abuse, whether you were kind of, your mobile phone was taken off you, there's so many things that could happen. So ask yourself the question, what would happen if I say no? And if there is a negative consequence, I would suggest really thinking about the relationship that you're in, and really thinking about whether it is a healthy relationship or not, or whether it's a relationship where there is significant power imbalance and there's a lot of control happening.
Wow, so there's a lot there to think of. So listeners, I hope you're absorbing all of this in this evening. I'm afraid there's a lot of information for you, but as we were saying, there's a lot of information out there on the websites as well. So you can go to the Muslim Women's Network website and just look up some of this again if it's a lot to absorb. We were talking there before the break about safety planning. It sounds horrific that we need to talk about something like that, but it's important. Can you kind of break down what is safety planning and who should be doing this?
So if you are in a situation where you do not feel safe, what we're saying to you today is seek support and get help, and you can get help to leave your situation. You may feel that it's particularly difficult right now. You may be worried about having to leave your home in this coronavirus situation, in this emergency situation. So safety planning is really about thinking about what would you do if you needed to leave? What would you need in order to leave also? To start with, you could pack an emergency bag for you and even your children, if you have children, and keep it somewhere safe, whether that's in your home, just outside your home, with a neighbor, with a family member. This could include stuff like medication, ID documents, money, any cards that you have, and essential clothing for you or your children. Now, this is, an emergency pack. So you don't need to pack a massive suitcase. You don't need to put in lots of clothes. If you were to leave, there are organizations out there who can support you to get you a whole new wardrobe if you needed that. This is about getting you to safety. So what do you need in an emergency situation to leave? So medication, ID, your money or cards, and essential clothes for you and your children would be something that you would pack in this bag.
What about ID if you, there's a lot of people mightn't have their passport, or the perpetrator might hold on to that. So actually they may not be able to take an ID, a driving license or a passport and have that with them.
You're right. Abusers often control those documents because they know how important it is. So if you don't have access to it and you're not going to be able to get it, then leave without it. Your safety is paramount. You can apply for a new passport. You can apply for a new bank account. Yes, it will take time, but in that time of applying, emergency support. So the Muslim Women's Network have something called our hardship fund. Our hardship fund is for those who are leaving, and are in crisis situations and would need help getting some of the stuff that they need immediately. We do it. Other organizations do it across the country. So if you can't get your hands on ID and it's not safe for you to try and get it, then I would say don't get it. Just leave your situation and make sure that you're safe.
And where would they put this small bag of things?
Yeah, so like I said, it needs to be accessible so that if you needed to leave immediately, you weren't kind of looking for it around the house. It needs to be somewhere. It could be in the house, but it needs to be accessible so that if you needed to leave, that you could leave straight away with it. People have left it in where the bins are. Some people have like a little caddy, where the bins are enclosed and they leave it there. Or they could just leave it in the alleyway next to their house, or they could leave it with a neighbor or with a family member, so that if you needed it, that bag could be accessed.
That's a good point indeed. And if they had this ready, at what point should they be thinking, okay, now this is time I need to go? What should they do when they start thinking, when those thoughts start coming into their mind? What was the first thing they should do?
Look, I would definitely say that when you're safety planning, think about your safety immediately. It may be that right now things are okay. You're having a calm few days with the abuser, your partner, and actually that's a good time to do some safety planning and get kind of everything ready for your departure. But you may not have the luxury of time. Your life may be in danger right now and you need to leave. So for each individual, it will be very different. And so there's not just, safety planning is really about figuring out, what do you need right now? Do you have access to a car? Can you get to safety? Are you going to need to get a taxi? Do you have money to be able to do that? So there's lots of steps. So the first thing I would do is definitely ask for support, phone a helpline, phone a friend, talk it through and figure out a plan. Sometimes when you're in these stressful situations, it's not easy to think through these things in a logical way, and it's really useful to speak to someone about it.
Oh, mashallah, that's really good information. And if then they were really thought, this is it now, I need to ring the police now, but I don't want to alert that I'm doing this because this is not quite right, but that's it. What could they do in that situation? It's not safe because I mightn't even get to the end of the phone call if I have to talk to somebody, or I might be left on hold. What could they do in that situation?
If you are in immediate danger, I would say call the police on 999. When you call the police on 999, if you're not able to speak because it's not safe for you to do so, you need to press the numbers 55 while you're on the call. So you ring 999, you wait for the operator to answer, and then you click 55 on your keypad. When you've done that, that alerts the police that this is an emergency situation, and they can then take action. Yeah. So this is a silent way of getting support to yourself.
And the police response rates, are they quite quick in a situation like this?
Yes. I think what we need to remember is that actually, yes, the police are stretched, but they definitely do a very good job of getting support. Police servers up and down the country are trained and understand domestic abuse much better than they ever have, and so get help, and get safe. Often with, in my mind, I'm thinking about an individual, a woman who's by herself, who needs to leave her situation. But if you have children and you need to get them to safety too, I do think that we have a responsibility to ensure that our children are safe also. So it's really, really important for you to seek help. In terms of other safety advice, things like your mobile phone. We've had cases where women have a mobile phone, but actually the abuser has put an app on their phone to track them. We also know on an iPhone, you can do, Find My iPhone, which is essentially a location tracker. So in terms of safety planning, if you are planning to leave, make sure that your location settings are switched off and you're not checking in. I'm hoping people don't do this anymore because we know about the safety around it. Like on Facebook, there was a trend where people used to check in when they got somewhere. So not to do those things, because obviously that's publicly available. And if the person is watching your social media content, then they'll be able to locate you quite quickly. So location settings, sometimes though, you may not know you have a tracker app on your phone. So I would say look through your apps and make sure you know what each app does, and none of the locations. So if you go into the settings on your phone, whether it's an Android phone or an iPhone, you will be able to turn location settings off. And I'd recommend you do that if you're planning to leave.
Oh, that's really good advice. And where would they leave to? I mean, we're picturing now somebody that has 2 kids, that has a car or has access to a car, so she actually is able to drive away, but she's now got into the car, has this plastic bag of emergency things with her, but doesn't know where to go, and maybe even freeze behind the wheel, thinking, what am I going to do next?
The quickest and easiest place to go to is the police for help. They are, like I said previously, the police are trained in understanding what domestic abuse is about. So if you're in the middle of the night and you're not sure where to go, find a police, call the police, or if you're in your car and you can get to a police station, get to a police station. What will happen then is you will be placed in temporary accommodation, and then you can access longer term support in finding you either a refuge space or other accommodation. If you're not leaving in a situation which is kind of something's happened and you've had to leave very quickly, and you've been able to safety plan over a period of time, what you can do is ensure that your housing is sorted, the place that you're going to has space for you and your children. So it's worth calling a helpline, they'll help you to find a refuge space for yourself or alternative accommodation, and make sure that that's ready for you so that when you get there, you've got a place to stay.
Right. So the importance there, the important message we're getting out to our listeners is planning, the importance of planning and having a plan in place. So if you are a victim here that is tuned into this station this evening and listening about this, or you are somebody that knows of a victim, please looking at how to plan, contact the professionals and how to make that plan. Because each person is going to be very different. Each person will be a very different plan to have, different situations with children, with no children. What is it in the nighttime, daytime, what to do to, so we need to get that message out there to ring you as a helpline to try and put this plan in place. So before we end the show, what other tips would you give, indeed, if there is somebody listening in and they do know of a friend and they want to get some more knowledge, some tips about this to educate themselves really before they educate or talk to their friend about it? What tips, what would you advise them out there?
You know, I realize that we've been talking also about leaving your home, and it's not always necessary for you, if you are the victim of abuse, to leave your home, particularly if you have children. You can contact the police about the abuse, and the abuser can be arrested and removed from the property. To prevent that person coming back into the home, you can get something called a non-molestation order. That is essentially an injunction which prevents the person from entering your property. So for those of you out there who are thinking, actually, I can't leave my home. This is my life. This is my children's home. I can't leave. You may not have to. And like I said, each situation is different, which is why I'm stressing as much as I can that try and speak to someone. Speak to the Muslim Women's Network helpline, speak to other organizations, speak to the police, and get yourself support. I would also say that if something happens, report to the police. I know we, don't always think they're going to help. We don't always trust the police in our communities. But if something is happening to you, it's really important to report it. And it may be that you report to the police for something called for information only. It may be that you want to make sure that the police are aware that someone's harassing you online. You want to make sure that the police are aware that there has been some level of abuse, whether it's emotional abuse, financial abuse. And the police can record this information for information only. And then if things escalate, you can then, the police are aware of your situation. They can respond, they know what's happening, and they can take the steps that they need to quicker.
Well, that's very important information there to give our listeners. Thank you for that. And some tips around this time now of isolation where we are all in an isolation place. What should we be doing to look after ourselves in our own mental health, even if there wasn't abuse happening, where we're all a little bit, overwhelmed by what's going on? Is there any tips that you could give us in the last few minutes? I'm sorry, we're just talking about that last few minutes, but I think it's important to add in this and trying to see how we can better look after ourselves in general.
Definitely. I think my message on that is speak to someone. So even if you're not in an abusive situation and you're feeling overwhelmed and stressed right now, and money is an issue, and you're worried about, schooling for your children and them not being in school, and you're worried about finances, speaking to your friends and your family who you can trust, or speaking to a helpline service can often just give you that space that you need, so that you're not alone, and you're not in this situation where you're reacting. Your reactions are, sometimes we doubt ourselves, is it just me? Am I just not handling this properly? Chances are it's not just you. Chances are we're all experiencing some level of increase in anxiety, and our mental health is suffering as a result of the situation we find ourselves in. So I would say seek support, speak to someone, find a helpline, find a listening service, and really just share. I think the saying that a problem shared is a problem halved, I think is quite true. But you want to make sure that the person that you're speaking to firstly is trusted, that, if what you tell them, you need to be confidential. That's why a helpline service, which is confidential and non-judgmental, is often a good space to be in. Like I said, there are many helplines open. The MWN helpline is open Monday to Friday, 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. And if you're not able to speak on the phone, you can email, you can web chat, and you can text us. And if you contact us outside of the opening hours, we will reply to you once we're back at work between 10 and 4. So get in touch, speak to those around you, speak to your family if you can, and just stay safe. I think the message for me today, Kathleen, is really that you don't have to be abused. You don't have to stay in the situation. Yes, the government guidelines, adhere to them, stay at home. But if you're not safe at home, then seek support, and support is available.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And just before we go, I just want to ask you, what are you doing to look after your own mental health in this situation? Any tip there for us?
Yeah, alhamdulillah, I think structure is important, routine is important. Also, go easy on yourself. You know, we all want to be super women, me first. We want to be super moms to our children. These are really strange times. So just take stock and go easy on yourself, and know that you're doing the best that you can in the situation. And it's okay. It's okay if the kids aren't schooled 9 to 3 every single day. It's okay if they get bored. It's probably good for them if they get bored. But I think having some level of a structure and a routine to the day can really help.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's been so useful talking to you this evening, and so interesting. I've learned a lot myself, indeed, from you. Jazakallah khairan for giving up your time and getting the message out there to everybody. I'm sure our listeners really enjoyed it and learned as well. Enjoyment is not the correct word, but it was very informative. And the message there of looking after ourselves in this time and looking after others and keeping safe. Thank you for getting across that message. It's very important. Inshallah, I hope all our listeners are doing that, looking after themselves and keeping safe, inshallah. And until next week, I'd like to just, again, thank you so much for coming this evening, and thanking our listeners for tuning in. And look after yourselves. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.